So, Jason, this is a follow-up to our episode 546.
Yes, sir.
Where we had on a pair of researchers who had done some work to codify arguments for and against QWACs and the QWAC architecture. And they did this in the absence of judgment. They just wanted to clarify what the arguments were because they're academic researchers and they're trying to contribute to the overall knowledge. You and I, on the other hand, are pundits.
Yes.
And what we're going to do is we're now going to break down those arguments and describe which ones are awesome and which ones are terrible.
Tim, I was going to squeak this in before you start reading.
Yes.
Which is, I'm going to open my comments the way I closed that episode 546, which is to say, QWACs, first of all, funny name. Second of all, it's European. Why are you a North American watching this episode? And I'm going to say this.
Okay.
Because the stuff Tim is about to bring up and we're going to discuss as pundits affects everybody.
Yeah. The internet's bigger than the boundaries, the borders of any given country. I say that a lot on this podcast. It's been a while since I said it. Thank you for opening for the door for me to say that again. The internet is bigger than the geographic footprint of your nation. All right. So they divided the arguments. They had a total of 20 arguments that they divided into 3 groups. We're going to take the first group for this episode. We're going to follow on with 2 more episodes. We're going to do 1 group per episode. So this is the security and trust grouping of arguments. For a definition of that, look at episode 546. So there's 3 pro, 4 con. Let's do the pro arguments all together and then talk about them. So STS1, the first pro argument. ST is security and trust. S1 in favor of. Strengthens website identity assurance.
Okay.
S2, display transparent trust indicator.
Yep. And
number 3, protect users from fraudulent websites. Okay. So I think these go together, right? Yeah. Strengthening website identity assurance means to say, I have a greater degree of confidence that this actually is my bank.
Yep.
The second one, I display a transparent trust indicator, something that's easy for me to look at and say, okay, I can have that confidence. And then the third one is, therefore, that will reduce my propensity to fall for a fraud attack.
Hey, I kind of like the green bar.
Yeah. This was the original reason to create the green bar and extended validation certificates back in the day.
EV certs, green bar.
Was exactly this. So that if I click on a link in an email and I go to a thing that looks like my package delivery service or my bank or my trading house or whatever and isn't, then it is possible for me to realize that it isn't and rescue myself. Thoughts?
I always liked the green bar.
Yeah, me too.
And for those of you who work for the company that fought against it really hard for your very, very specific purposes for yourself, shame on you.
Okay.
Period.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think it was a tool that was reliable.
Yep.
And that a user with adequate knowledge could use to help themselves be more secure. And I don't see the rationale in taking that tool away.
It had no arguable negative effects.
Yeah.
And any arguments that were made that way were BS.
Yeah, well, we'll hear those because that's the negatives. So let's talk about these. STC1 through STC4. I'm going to read these out. Number 1, do not enhance user risk awareness. Number 2, do not deliver effective trust signals. Number 3, degrade user data protection. Might have to clarify what that one means a little. And number 4, introduce new attack vectors. So I think 1 and 2 go together. do not enhance user risk awareness, and do not deliver effective trust signals. So this is basically the argument that was made. And kind of UX engineers from Chrome were going around doing the circuit maybe 4 or 5 years ago as the green bar was being phased out, and there were blog posts and papers and things. And what was being said at the time was, we've measured this and we have an N value of 53 million and or whatever it was. And it turns out that behavior doesn't change. And therefore that we're going to get rid of it, that it has no utility. My response to that is to say, well, okay, first of all, it's hard to contend that the number is truly zero. Like, even if the number is very small, I don't think they proved that it was zero. I don't think they proved that nobody ever protected themselves from a phishing attack by using this. And I don't think they can prove it. And even if that number is small, if the price tag is zero, why don't you do it?
Correct.
Right? And by the way, even if that number is smaller now, perhaps that number could be made not small through things like public education campaigns and consistent application of the interface convention, right?
I also think, Tim, that you have to be careful of bias and self-serving motivations.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to call out and say that I think that was part of the story, and especially because of the rest of the user interface changes that occurred even afterwards, which continued to degrade.
Well, and also when that research was done that they were out showing around, that was after a series of, I'll call, step downs. So, originally there was a green field, and then that turned into green text on a white field. And then that turned into a green lock next to the regular color of text on a white field. And so we were already minimizing. So people have used the example of things like traffic signals or stop signs. It turns out that red octagon can be found all over the globe with different writing on it, but it's still the red octagon. And if I get in a rental car and I go to somewhere where they are showing a language I have no hope of reading, I can still recognize the red octagon. So, but if I were to begin to modify that, I turn it into a red circle, and then I make it smaller, and then I make it orange, and then I publish research saying that the red octagon is not effective as a traffic signal, then my response to that is, well, yeah, because you made it ineffective.
It was a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
It's bias. It is absolute, obvious evidence of bias. It's not research.
Yeah. So, those were the arguments that were presented against.
Fair enough.
There are two other ones. Degrade user data protection. I'm not 100% convinced what that argument is trying to say. And then the last one is introduce new attack vectors. And the basic idea here is that by adding complexity, it's this security through simplicity argument, which I think is valid, right? You reduce your risk surface as much as you can, reduce your attack vectors as much as you can. This is more complexity. Because there's more complexity, then that's another way. Imagine a scenario where somebody manages to get some kind of 0-day where they can display something in that isn't really,
The attack that was shown back in the day in the original research was, hey, we created a name collision.
Right.
The name of an existing business I was able to get.
Yeah. It was Stripe.
Right.
And it was made big headlines at the time. And it was done by a British high school student on his lunch hour, which is kind of funny. And he's gone on to be someone who shows up in this world. And so there is a fundamental problem with organizational identity,
Yep.
which is that names are not unique. By the way, it's also a problem with human identity, that names are not unique. And because names are not unique, and this is kind of built into our society in a very basic way, then that creates the potential for these collisions. And people have tried to solve this with things like LEIs,
Yep.
which have been dubiously successful. They're not without their merits, but they haven't really solved the basic problem. And I guess if your argument is going to be that if we can't do this perfectly, then we shouldn't do it at all, then that's an argument. I'm skeptical of that.
Especially when the same group actually took away that by default, the ability to look at the fully qualified domain name.
Right. The absence of the FQDN for sure is part of this whole thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It does make it harder. So, is it possible that you go to some nation somewhere in the world and name yourself Bank of America and get away with it and go get a cert?
Look, Tim,
Maybe, but that was part of the reason that the original implementation by Microsoft QWAC back in the day also included the country you were in. Because
Amazing.
if it says Bank of America, Indonesia, you know something's wrong.
the combination of the
Right?
green bar, which meant it's an EV cert no matter what, the country, the company name, the fully qualified domain name
Yeah.
was compelling. And as a risk signal in my brain, systematically taking all of that away was evidence of bias, not evidence of you're doing the right thing for me.
Yeah. And then the other thing, I think another thing when we see this first point, do not enhance user risk awareness. I know back in the day, I'm talking about the late 2000s, let's say 2007 through 2010, there was an appetite among people who are attempting to optimize website performance to measure exactly this. And I made a hobby of collecting those. And I, in the course of several years, probably found 20 of them. It's a guess, but that's the ballpark, where people had done what essentially was an A/B split test. I'm going to put an AV on this cluster and not on this cluster. I'm going to measure the difference because I want to know if I should invest my money. And of the people who published their results, every one of them saw an uptick. And the smallest of them were single-digit percentage points, which still is huge. If you're optimizing an e-commerce site, which is something that I was doing back in the 2000s, that's huge. That's ridiculous. It's shocking, right? And some of them were in double digits. There would be people with 20% plus, right?
Wow.
And so that was real A/B split testing. Now, it is possible that performing that test in 2009 and performing that test in 2020 would yield very different results. The world is very different. So I want to be very cautious about taking those results from that day and saying they would apply now. But I think at minimum, there's enough smoke there that you would want to have a closer look at that.
And the amount of poisoning of the well.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think poisoning of the well is a very real concern here. That by the time the tests were conducted, let's take it at red that what was reported was accurate, like numbers wise. That by the time the tests were conducted, the way the interface had changed was crippling the ability of the UX, in this case, the EV cert, to do what was originally intended to do. Yep. And I think that there was a sense of that in the EU. And I feel like that was part of what led to this legislation, was this sense of, this doesn't, first of all, this just doesn't correspond to any reasonable person's intuition. And second of all, I have grave concerns about the person who has presented this purported evidence.
Yep. There you go.
So, so that's the first set of them.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Jay.